Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our market update. Today we have Cornerstone Wealth's Cliff Hodge and Jeff Carbone. They'll be presenting along with Dr. David Jacobs, joining us for a discussion on COVID-19 relief efforts. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a few moments. Hey, Cliff, can you do me a favor and add Jeff Carbone over to the actual presentation from the attendee list? Thank you.
All right, Jeff, can you hear me?
I could hear you. You may not have my video, but let's see. Maybe I have got video now. Sorry about that. See if I can.
We should have the presentation up. Can you see that?
Yep. All right. All right. So let's get started. Sorry, everybody, for that. And is David on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Good afternoon, David. Thanks for joining us. All right, we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our weekly market update. Thanks for joining Cliff and I for our regular series here. So we thank you for joining us. We hope you all are safe and healthy. Want to thank, as you heard, David Jacobs, Dr. David Jacobs from Atrium Healthcare. So David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all you've been doing and all the healthcare professionals have been doing out there during this crisis and pandemic that we've been all dealing with. So everyone, we're gonna, as you all know from the previous calls, we have a Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for David or for Cliff or myself regarding markets, economy, and positioning, we'll go through that throughout the call. So David, to be respectful of your time, we're going to start out with you, and we'll, if you've got things to do, I know you're busy, you can certainly let us know, but let me do a quick introduction and we'll jump into some questions for you.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Well, Dr. David Jacobs is the Chief of Trauma Surgery at Atrium Healthcare here in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the largest healthcare systems in the Carolinas, if not David, it may be the largest healthcare system in the Carolinas, I believe.
Well, it's like number 2 or 3 in the country.
Okay, there you go. Well, David has held Trauma and Surgical Critical Care Fellowship and Pediatric Surgery Research Fellowship at Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems. He is a graduate from the Weill Medical College of Cornell University. David has many accolades outside of being a featured speaker and throughout the country. David has accolades from the Charlotte Area FBI Community Service Award, the Pride Community Service Award, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Medallion Award, and the Carlton G. Watkins Award for his commitment to Charlotte youth and the community. So David, thanks for joining us today. Again, appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we'll jump right into it. The virus has certainly been unprecedented in many ways. How has the medical community handled the challenge, and has the actions of shelter in place, et cetera, has that helped to curb this virus?
Well, Jeff, you're right. This was unprecedented. Nobody really expected that this was going to be as bad as it was, or as bad as it's been so far. But the medical community has really come together. I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. Medicine has become very specialized, and we've got people that specialize now in the left knee and the right knee and the left index finger. But everybody has really sort of cast those subspecialty concerns aside to really put this pandemic first and foremost. So we've got people who probably do orthopedic surgery on a regular basis, who are seeing patients in the office that may have cold and flu symptoms, something that they haven't done for 30 or 40 years. The hospitals, as everyone knows, has really ratcheted down elective care. So I know it's difficult for folks to get in and see their own physicians. Surgeries have been delayed, so they were only doing essential surgery. All that was done with keeping in mind the limited resources that we have to free up hospital beds, free up healthcare providers, free up medical resources, ventilators, PPE, et cetera, so that when the surge came, we were all ready to go. So nobody thought this was going to happen, but the amount of effort and collaboration that has gone into getting ready for this has taught us some very, very valuable lessons, and lessons that I hope that we will not forget once the pandemic has passed.
Yeah, thank you, David. I mean, I know it's been a major effort on everybody throughout the medical community. So it's again just an amazing effort, and you're the fellow physicians in New York, California certainly have felt a bigger feeling. Certainly, New York has been in a different situation. So, I'd be interested at some point to talk to you about how, if you people that you may know up there. But I'm going to go to another question we have, David, with the shelter-in-place orders, maybe locally, how effective locally have they really been, given what's all that's going on in the Carolinas?
Well, I don't think we know. And, the biggest criticism that has been hurled at us since this whole thing began is that we don't have the adequate testing. So it's difficult to know how many people out there are actually infected. We know that there are many, many, many asymptomatic carriers of this disease now. And so without really knowing what the incidence or the prevalence, I guess, of the disease is in the community, it's hard to know whether we've been able to, quote unquote, flatten the curve as a result of the social distancing guidelines. I think what we do know is that if you look at the growth rate of death, or the death rate that occurred early when this first disease hit the U.S., when we look at how steep that up curve was, that curve has certainly flattened out. We really don't have another explanation for why the curve would have flattened out, other than identifying folks, quarantining folks, but probably most importantly, people self-quarantining and getting people off the streets and social distancing and sheltering at home. So I think the answer to your question is yes, it's been effective. The curve has been flattened, and we can get into that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but the curve has clearly been flattened, and I think that's primarily due to social distancing, but without hard numbers in terms of actual testing and testing of the entire population, it really is difficult to say.
David, I'm going to ask you one more question before I turn it over. I know Cliff has a few questions as well, and maybe the folks listening in. But we've had some really nice weather over the last few days here in the Carolinas. When I look and watch the news around, especially in the Northeast, a lot of people out and about, maybe more than we have seen in a while. Going to the stores, some folks are wearing masks, others are not. So my question is really, are any thoughts on those that are not taking this serious enough?
Oh, yeah, Jeff, I got some real thoughts about that, but none that I can share on this phone call.
David.
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep this PG here. But I think the bottom line is that everybody who is knowledgeable about this is saying that there's still so much we do not know about this virus, about reinfection, about whether we might expect a second wave in the fall or in the winter. And so everybody is calling for caution. Everybody who is a scientist and understands how these things work is calling for caution. Yeah, we flattened the curve. It's not as bad as many people anticipated. But I think that everybody's fearful that there could be a second or third wave. And as you can recall from the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, the third wave was actually the worst and killed a lot more people than the second and the first wave. And so as we've learned before, if you don't learn from your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So my message to people that are out there on the beaches again, and those folks who, quite frankly, all along have minimized the impact of this. There's 58,000 people in this country who are dead as a result of this. My personal feeling is that it's disrespectful to the people who have lost loved ones, people who were not able to say goodbye to their loved ones, and quite frankly, it's disrespectful to us as healthcare providers. I've got a lot of friends who are on more than the front line, who are more on the front lines than I am. They're putting their lives on the line on a daily basis. They're quarantining from their families. They're making great personal sacrifice while people are out there minimizing the impact of this. And my message to them is the least that you can do is stay home. We got other people out there who are putting their lives on the line. The very least that you can do to contribute to this problem is to stay at home until we have more information about when it really is going to be safe to come out. So I hope that was PG enough, but I hope people can read between the lines.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, it's again, everything you said. Again, I would think it's for those that have been lost during this. It is a sign of disrespect. I would agree. We all have to do our part. So, and putting on a mask or social distancing is the least we can do. Why can't we do it? So thanks, David. I know Cliff, you've got a few questions, and everybody, my video's back working, so I'm back on. But Cliff, I know you've got a few for Dr. Jacobs, so I'm going to turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Great. Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for your time being with us today. But more importantly, thank you and for those that you represent on your team and the health system writ large for all the hard work, all the additional hours, the risking your well-being and lives on behalf of those who really need it. I mean, it says a lot about your character and those that you work with. So thank you. There are a couple of questions that have come in, so maybe I'll hit on those. But I do have one, as it relates to getting back to quote unquote normalcy. Right. So, as we begin to start to think about getting back to a normal schedule, I mean, are there any? I'm sure you guys are having a ton of conversations, but any thoughts on a timeline as far as those non-elective procedures? Some of those of us who may be looking to give birth here over the next weeks and months. That's something a concern for that we have personally. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think from a medical community perspective, I think the operative words are we are going to do a soft reopening or a gradual reopening. people may be under the impression that we shut surgery down entirely, or elective surgery. We did not. We call it essential and non-essential. And so a lot of surgery has actually gone on. A lot of patient care has actually gone on, but we did ramp it down significantly to free up resources. So those will be opened up gradually, and so the patients who really, really need more timely surgery will be the first in line. Patients who have difficult to manage medical problems will be the first in line, and we'll see how that goes. Again, part of the problem here is that we don't know what's coming around the corner. We don't know whether we're in for a second wave or a third wave, and the last thing I think we want to do is to open full up at once, and then find out that now we do have a shortage of ventilators, now we do have a shortage of beds, we do have a shortage of PPE. And so I think as time goes on and we get a better sense for what direction the virus is going to take, whether some of the community openings that are occurring are going to lead to reinfections. We believe that once you've been infected, you probably will be immune, but no one knows that for a fact. And so, again, I think a cautious, graduated approach to opening not just the healthcare system, but opening our cities and our economy, and that's where you guys come in. So I'm not going to try to weigh in on the economy, but I think a gradual reopening as we get more information is the best way to do things.
Yeah, Cliff, I see a couple of questions that came in, and when you and Cliff, I'm just going to give you a heads up. You may want to get closer to your microphone a little bit. You were a little bit there, but just a heads up. So, David, we've got one question was on Dr. Fauci announced positive initial results from remdesivir trials, and I think that's been on the news this morning and on CNBC and a lot of the business networks, and given a little bit of pop to this market today. But if this drug continues to have positive results, does this help ease fears about returning to somewhat normal lives any sooner?
Well, I think it does. The results that we've had are from very, very, very small trials. And so I think there's two issues here. There will continue to be trials to make sure that the results that we have seen from the trials that have already been done are valid across a host of different patient populations. So the thing to keep in mind is when you look at these trials, they're done in very, very select patient populations. And as we know, this virus tends to attack folks who are elderly and folks who have compromised immune systems and associated medical problems. So the question will be, how well will it work in those particular patient populations? And I think we just need more data. We don't have the luxury of time to go through all of the testing that we normally do, and so there are clinical trials that are actually ongoing over here at the medical center using that medication. I think the other question will then become, will the industry be able to scale up production of this medication to the extent that we need it? And if not, then who's going to be making the decisions as to who gets it and who doesn't? So I think there is some upside to all of this, but every upside comes with a potential downside in having to wrestle with some of the other questions regarding the ethics, regarding the availability, regarding the cost, regarding the access, all the other things that sort of come along with that. So I hope that answers the question.
And maybe, David, my understanding with remdesivir, it shortens the time of the virus when someone catches it or gets it. It maybe helps take a few days off the expect. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
That's the results of the studies that we have so far. The clinical trial that we're looking at here, again, you have to have a certain level, a certain severity of illness before you can even get into the trial. Again, and so I think we just don't have enough data to know how effective and perhaps the best way to use this medication. It will clearly be used on the most severely ill patients. But again, I just don't know that we have enough information. I think part of the problem, as you saw with the hydroxychloroquine situation, was that we're so desperate to have something that we can latch on to say, now we can sort of take a deep breath and relax, that we are bypassing a lot of the normal channels that we would normally go through for drug approval and data acquisition on all of these medications before we get them to market. And so there's some risk there too. As you can recall, there was a lot of enthusiasm about hydroxychloroquine a couple of weeks ago, and folks are saying, well, it can't hurt you, let's go ahead and take it, and now we know that that's not the case. And so, again, I got ready to call myself a scientist, but the folks in the science community are urging caution. They're saying, yes, the preliminary trials look good. Let's get some more information. Let's use it on patients in whom we really don't have a whole lot of other options, and let's see what we come up with. So I just think the final chapter is not written, and there'll be more to come.
And David, let me know if you have a few more minutes. I've got a few more questions for you, but I do want to make sure that you get back to work as you need to. You have about 5
I'm good, Jeff.
Okay. So we've got a question from Sharon, and her question is, what is Atrium Health's plan for testing of each kind, including antibody testing? Antibody testing. Will CV testing become a common test when we go to the doctor in the near term? And she gave a shout out and says, thank you to all the medical professionals out there.
Well, we appreciate her gratitude and her question. We still don't know here at Atrium Health. The problem with the antibody tests is that there's a number of them out there. As I just mentioned earlier, there's been so much of a rush to get these things to market that the typical FDA controls that are in place for some of these things have been bypassed. And so I just heard yesterday that a number of these antibody tests are essentially worthless. And so you can see them advertised online. You can see them advertised on TV. People are saying, come on in and get your tests. But there's a high false negative rate associated with this. And so I think we have to wait until we have, you're going to get tired of hearing me say that, but I think we have to wait until we have more reliable tests before we can begin to advocate universal testing for antibodies. In an ideal world, every healthcare provider or every frontline provider would have antibody testing so that they would know whether they've been exposed and whether they can go back and work in an environment with a little bit more confidence. I don't think we're there yet. When we get there, if and when we get there, I do think that many healthcare systems will be advocating that all of their frontline healthcare workers get tested. As far as virus testing, your regular COVID-19 nasal swab kind of testing, many institutions right now are doing that for high-risk patients and for anybody who's going to undergo an operation. Putting a breathing tube in somebody to operate on them runs the risk of disseminating the virus throughout the operating room. And so certainly for patients who are not undergoing emergency surgery, if your surgery is not an emergency and can be done with a 1 to 2 day delay, most operating rooms, most hospitals are recommending that those patients be tested for COVID-19 to be sure that they're negative and don't unduly expose a number of people to infection. Until we have more testing available, we're not going to be able to test all the people that we would like to test. You'd like to know that the people that are in the waiting room next to you waiting to see your physician have been tested and are negative. We do have some rapid tests available, but they're not available on a grand scale. And to be honest, I'm not sure they ever will be to the extent that we need them. And so, again, I think this is going to be another situation where we're going to be doing things cautiously. we're going to be saying this is a patient population that's at high risk and therefore needs to be tested, but we really don't have the resources to be able to test everybody that we would like to test at this point.
I think, David, we've got another one from Bill who wants maybe a little clarification on the risk population. And are the elderly without underlying conditions at higher risk than a 50-year-old? So Bill is 73. He just wants a little bit better understanding of a 50-year-old versus 73, maybe on the that risk population with no underlying conditions.
The short answer is yes. Age is a significant risk factor for death from this, as is significant comorbidity. So the highest risk category is the elderly with significant comorbidities. But if you look at the mortality rates, they increase with age. And so 75-year-olds higher than a 65-year-old. An 85-year-old is higher than a 75-year-old with or without coexisting medical conditions. Obviously, if you don't have coexisting medical conditions, you're not a diabetic, you don't have heart disease, you don't have kidney disease, you're not taking medicines that might weaken your immune system, you're going to be at somewhat lower risk. But the fact that you're 75 years old means you have 75-year-old kidneys, you have 75-year-old lungs, you have 75-year-old heart, and your immune system does degrade with age. And so even if you don't have one of those defining illnesses, your immune system is probably at 75 is not as robust as it was at age 55 or age 45, and so that does put you at higher risk.
Dave, we've got another one that this is probably, as they even put it, an impossible answer that you probably will know. I don't think you're going to be able to answer it, but they want to know about any expectation of a vaccine. Anything that you're hearing?
I'll make it up if I don't know. Yep.
Kind of figured that. And then what about, this was maybe for those, a lot of folks have pets, cats, dogs. We've heard of, I guess there's been some cases of the lion or the tiger in Bronx Zoo, and then there was a few others I've read about. But what's the impact on our pets with COVID? I know it's more for a veterinarian than yourself, but I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, all I know is what I've read, and that, yeah, there have been some case reports of domesticated animals having the virus. I'm unaware of any significant transmission of disease from animal to human, at least from domesticated animal to human. And so I don't think we need to do anything particular about our dogs and our cats at this point. If you have bats, that may be a different situation, but if you have bats, you have other things to worry about. From the perspective of a vaccine is coming, a vaccine will come, but it's like everything else, we got to go through the tests. Some of the vaccines have been shown in the past, not specifically looking at the COVID vaccines, but some of the vaccines that came to market did not help the situation, in fact, were harmful. And so I think the country wants to be very, very sure that when these vaccines come to market, that they are effective and they are safe. We already have a significant portion of the population that already has inherent biases against vaccines, the anti-vaxxers. And this is a situation where we're going to need a large amount of the population to buy into the concept of getting vaccinated. This is going to be like many other viral epidemics. This could well come back again a year from now, 2 years from now, and so getting vaccinated makes a lot of sense once we know we have a safe vaccine that's effective. So I think it will come. Where we will be in the curve when it comes, it could come after the vast majority of our population has been exposed and already has what we call herd immunity or innate immunity and probably won't need the vaccine. So a lot of things are going to happen. We're going to have a lot more information about who needs to be vaccinated. Do we have an antibody test that works, in which case you might not need to be vaccinated? So those are a lot of questions that we're going to need answers to, but typically it takes 12 to 18 months for a vaccine to come to market after all these clinical trials. And so I don't think it's going to be the short answer, but hopefully it will really help long-term, particularly in terms of reinfection, if that becomes a possibility.
David, maybe one last question. Again, Atrium's been a big part of my family in terms of, I know Shannon worked there working with folks like yourself. Atrium Maine is probably the #1 trauma center, as you know. COVID patients, are they moved to a different part of the hospital, a different hospital, separate wing? What happens when someone comes in with COVID-19 to the hospital right now?
Most of the time, we don't know that they're COVID-19 positive. Because of the size of the Atrium Health Network and the number of hospitals that we have just in the metro area, most patients are able to get care, even those with severe COVID disease. Most patients are able to get care at their own local hospital. So if you live in South Charlotte, you live near Pineville, or you live up near Cabarrus, there are COVID patients in those hospitals. We had talked about cohorting all of the COVID patients into one hospital, but quite frankly, the numbers never got high enough to justify that. So in most of the hospitals now within the Atrium Health Network, at least in the Charlotte area, there's a handful, maybe a few more patients in each hospital. They are all cohorted. They're cohorted in one ICU. There are patients who are COVID positive that don't need ICU care, that are cohorted on a different floor. But everybody gets screened. You cannot get into Atrium Health Care as a family member, as a patient, as an employee. You cannot get into this hospital without getting screened. So every day I walk in here, they take my temperature. They ask me if I've lost my sense of taste and smell. Am I having a cough? Do I have any shortness of breath? Everybody gets those questions answered. The hospital is essentially on lockdown. You cannot get in. And so, again, that's a social distancing effort to try to make sure that the hospital is as safe a place as it can possibly be. So the short answer is yes, the patients who screen positive and then the patients who we test, who then we know are positive, are all cohorted into a specific unit.
Thanks, David. Cliff, any other questions that you had or that you can think of?
Just the last one that I have interest in from a market perspective. You talk about reinfection, potentially in the fall. Any expectations on that? I guess along with the typical flu season, how the interplay of those two could work out.
Yeah, again, no one really knows. We believe that once you've been infected, that you're going to gain immunity, and that you will not be reinfected. We don't know that for sure. We do know that there's still probably a large number of asymptomatic carriers out there who could potentially spread the disease. Some of these flus, some of these viral pandemics will tamp down as the weather gets warm. I don't think we know that with this particular virus. If you go back to the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, there was an initial surge in the spring. There was a sort of a taper off in the fall. In the summer, it came back in the fall, and then came back with a real vengeance the following spring. So, again, I don't think we have that information. We know that there will be an annual flu epidemic. There always is. This is not the flu. The coronavirus is a different kind of virus than the flu virus. And so I think we should be prepared to deal with a flu season, the typical flu season, which occurs in the winter, and a possible resurgence of coronavirus. And what that means is we just have to have the PPE, we have to have the ventilators. We can't let our guard down now and say, well, things seem to be improving. We can relax, we can take a deep breath. I think if we do that, we really haven't learned any lessons from this. And so we need to be sure that we build up the national stockpile. We need to be sure that the states have the PPE, the beds, the ventilators, all the other things we need in case we do end up with both of those issues when the weather turns cold again.
Thanks, David. I think we're going to let you go. Before we do, again, on behalf of the Cornerstone team, the Cornerstone family of clients, Cornerstone family, Cliff and myself, we thank you for all you do as a frontline healthcare worker, and to all your fellow healthcare workers at Atrium and around the country. Thank you for all you're doing. We wish you well. We pray for you every night. But be safe, okay, David?
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And if everybody on the call, if you see people out there congregating, shake your fist at them. Just tell them, separate and be safe. Okay, we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Be safe.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. We're going to continue on, and we're going to kind of go into our market update. I know we're running a little bit longer than we typically have been. So we're going to kind of jump in as the market volatility has remained elevated as we've been talking about the COVID-19. We're continuing to monitor the economic cost of the shutdown along with the restrictions. Many sectors and industries have felt a lot of pain, i.e. energy, i.e. travel, consumer discretionary. We've seen others weathering through the storm, and in some cases we've seen those that are thriving. We're continuing to monitor and work through the economic environment with a sound investment process. And today we're going to start out as we have been. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff, talk about some of the market conditions we've been watching this week.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And actually going to keep you on your toes this week and call an audible, given that the 1QG came out this morning. So we'll start with the economy, but we'll keep it tight this week, given that we're already pushing 40 minutes here. So just hit on GDP, down 4.8 for 1Q 2020, which is was worse than consensus, which was a -4. Obviously, January through March, this includes 2 weeks of the shutdown, but it was really predominantly driven by consumption growth, down near 8% for the first quarter. As you can see from the long run chart here, that's the worst print since 2Q of 1980. So there's some evidence when you look below the surface that maybe consumers were taking their foot off the gas a little bit from a spending perspective before the shutdown, but obviously hit pretty hard. So this is 1Q. Again, most of this is pre-virus. 2Q we'll get later on in the year, but anticipating that these numbers will continue to get worse before they get better. In addition to GDP this morning, pending home sales came out month over month. This is for March. Home sales were down 20%, or 21%. Again, worst print since the global financial crisis back in 08, 09. But interestingly enough, for those following like home building stocks, the ETF, by and large, have had their best month on record in the month of April. Just goes to show, kind of how backwards things are in the markets and the economy. So I'll just roll through quickly and provide updates on the jobless claims numbers. These are the high frequency data points that we are most focused on. Last week, another 4.4 million, with estimates for another 3.3 million tomorrow morning. So obviously, the trend is getting a little bit better, that we're coming down. But interestingly enough, over the past 5 weeks, we have essentially lost all jobs. Not necessarily the same ones, but from a number perspective, all the jobs created since the last recession have been taken out during the shutdown. So again, not just kind of highlighting the severity of the economic situation for those at home. Continuing claims, again, we're tracking this here. So this is the after you go through and file the initial claim, if you have to go back to the unemployment office for additional claims, you show up here. 16 million is what we have seen, but importantly, furloughed employees do show up in the initial claims number, but do not show up in continuing claims, which is important because we're able to track the flow through of what is temporary versus what is permanent. Temporary meaning furloughed, permanent meaning, you don't have any guarantees of getting the job back that you lost. So, obviously this is trending in a bad direction. Initially it was very low, the number of permanent job losses. With this last week, nearly 80% of the claims that came in are considered permanent. So we'll continue to monitor that. Then lastly, on the economic front, again, the New York Fed put out the WEI, the Weekly Economic Index, which is essentially just a dashboard of 10 high-frequency economic data points. And then they backfilled the series going back to 2008. Obviously, we're looking at a worse situation so far, about 3x what we saw in 08. Predominantly driven by the stats that we saw in the labor market, right? So again, you can just see the relative differences both from continuing claims and then from an initial claim standpoint. I mean, that's what's really throwing that index down. Jeff, you're on mute.
You threw the audible at me, Cliff, so we're going to continue along and maybe talk not just about the economy. So I'm going to throw an audible at you, and I think maybe it's not an audible because you got a slide in there. But we're in a big earnings week. We've got about, I think, 170 companies reporting this week. Boeing, Alphabet, I believe Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook. So we've got some big earnings reports coming out from some of the big companies. So let's talk about earnings and maybe and go back to the market a bit.
Yeah, and while we have been speaking, we've gotten some results from some of the major players. Microsoft, Tesla, Facebook came out. Looks like pretty positive reaction for the most part. But this is as of this morning. We've had 172 out of 500 companies report. Sales up roughly 2. Earnings per share down 15, predominantly driven by the banks. So bank stocks nearly down 50%, along with materials, industrials, some of the more cyclical areas of the economy. Still quite a bit of a ways to go. The rest of the week, again, this is something that we're going to monitor. But from a markets perspective, earnings have actually had very little impact. So just looking at the 1 month returns, we've been surprised by the speed and the resiliency of what the market has been able to do in the month of April, up nearly 15%. Still down around 9 year to date, but have made up more than half of the losses, roughly 2/3 of the losses that we experienced in that March drawdown. But still a lot of damage done from a sector perspective and from a factor perspective. So again, this gives credence to what we're doing on the investment side and to our process. Being underweight or completely out of a lot of these sectors, these cyclical sectors, which are what we want to avoid in quad 4, again, which is when both GDP growth and inflation are both decelerating as they are and will likely continue to do. Having overweights in a lot of the sectors that have been doing well, and the defensive positioning has helped us throughout the entire process, but obviously it's held back a little bit in the face of this rally. So this is an update of the S&P as of about lunchtime. So we're actually a little bit higher than this even here now. Again, 35% drawdown, roughly 30% on the way up. So we've retraced 2/3 of what of what these losses are. But that being said, now from a valuation perspective, right, with price to earnings being, one of the major valuation metrics that both we in the market keep an eye on, we're getting to pretty extreme levels when you look at it on a forward basis. So what is the price divided by the expectations of earnings over the next 12 months? Nearly 20 times, which is, you have to go back to again, the recession of 01 and coming out of the dot-com bubble to get to a valuation at this level. So, you have to think, this is a mean reverting series, right? So it tends to want to go back to its longer run averages. Two ways of doing that: either the E, so the earnings has to go up. We don't think that's a very high likelihood of that happening, or the P has to come back down. So we'll continue to watch, but certainly not great from a valuation perspective. And as we talk a lot about equities and how they've rebounded, a lot of it emotionally driven, a lot of it algorithmic and machine driven. Even other asset classes are not confirming. They're not playing along. So as we'll see, the S&P really, if you look at the time perspective here, the S&P really cracked at the end of February, but there is predictive power in looking at these other segments of the market. So yields, the 10-year Treasury, even though Fed was out today and had some very dovish and accommodative language, we didn't really budge from a yield perspective. And again, if you look, so mid-February there was the waterfall, but yields were telling you really back in December, early January that something was afoot, right? That there was trouble. And so again, we continue to believe in the predictive power of these other market signals, and they're just not confirming. High yield spreads, another one. Again, this is the difference in interest rates between high yield bonds and the equivalent treasury bonds. So you see that we blew out up here over to 1100, just kind of hanging out now, this 800 basis points. We want to see that come back down to these more normalized levels. Similar story with investment grade credit. Obviously didn't blow out to the same degree, but the pattern is the same, right? And again, if this is really at the beginning of 2020, you can kind of see starting to turn up here again prior to the equity markets. U.S. dollar is another one. So even though the Fed is throwing the kitchen sink, our central authorities from a fiscal perspective as well with stimulus, the dollar is not budging. It's down a little bit today, but still, near all-time highs. Commodities is another one. Again, that predictive power. So something was happening here in January prior to the waterfall, predominantly driven by oil, but still, hanging out down here at the lows. We seem to be stabilizing a bit. Oil had a good day today, so that that's positive, but we've got to see more action here as well. So here's oil. Again, very similar. In January, February, oil started breaking down prior to equities. You got the waterfall. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But copper, this is actually a pretty good sign. So again, another data point confirming what we're talking about from a timing perspective. We've rallied quite a bit off the lows in copper, and it's holding. But it remains to be seen. It's back up to the top end of the range here. So this is one that we'll keep a close eye on for validation that we're back off to the races, or if this is just a wicked head fake and we head back down. But that's if you think about we've talked about the yellow light, red light, green light. This is a yellow. It's certainly shifted from a red, but not yet green. Similar deal with VIX and volatility, right? So we've come way in. We're still elevated. This is a 1-year view, but the long run average is closer to 17, 18. So still have a long way to go, but getting back towards the levels where we would start to feel comfortable buying dips and re-gearing from a beta perspective on the equity side and on the fixed income side. So That's an update from the signals. I mean, just from positioning, we still remain defensive, have elevated cash levels. So, we're well aware that the FOMO, the fear of missing out is real and something that we talk every day about it on the investment committee level. But we're going to have plenty of opportunities, right? So we're 2 months into this pandemic, with a lot of the worst economic numbers still in front of us. So we're going to go back and continue to lean on our 3 Ps. So the planning, patience, planning process, patience, Jeff, to really be prudent about how we navigate whatever is going to be in front of us.
Well, thanks, Cliff. I know we went over a lot today with starting with Dr. Jacobs and kind of just a from the front lines, from a healthcare professional, and great doctor, great guy. Appreciated his time. Cliff, thanks for sharing. Again, just on the economic data we talked about GDP and jobless claims and job losses and what we're continuing to watch. You also can continue to show and review the talk about earnings. We talked about, again, yield spreads. We've talked about valuations. So again, when we continue to take that active approach for all of our clients in all of our portfolios, we know what you hold, we know why we hold it, and we know why we don't want to hold it. There, again, as you keep hearing us say, there's a process to why we do things. There's also going to be an opportunity for as we emerge, as Cliff just mentioned. We want our portfolios to be in a stronger position as we emerge from the virus, from the negative economic data, and we're preparing for that. We don't see the signals and signs as of yet. So as we do recover, we'll be there. We'll continue to make adjustments. We want to thank you for your time. We know we took a little bit more. We want you all to be healthy and safe. Wear your masks. Do your social distancing part. Don't go in a group. Maybe don't go to a concert. Again, be safe. Again, thank you for listening. If there's other questions, certainly send us any emails. Listen in. Next week, we'll be back. Also, we'll have the recap and the recording probably in the next day or so. If you want to share that with fellow friends, family, coworkers, feel free to pass along the invite, or let us know someone that you'd like us to invite. Again, thank you for your time. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cliff.